Hey Allan, thank you for meeting with us today. My friend Hezekiah is working on a project where he's going to be using MVC, and he's never used MVC before or any design pattern before. So I was wondering if you could maybe share what your thoughts are on what a design pattern is and why would anyone want to use one?
Absolutely. So a design pattern is basically a general way or strategy to solve common software problems. And they're prescriptive in nature. They recommend kind of like best practices or common patterns to solve common software problems.
Could you tell us about a time where you were maybe working with some messy legacy code, or maybe it was your own code and you had to use a design pattern like MVC to help clean it up?
Absolutely. So if design patterns kind of codify the best practices and these templates to solve these problems, its evil twin is the anti-pattern or different kinds of anti-patterns. And one of the most common ones I deal with pretty much on a daily or weekly basis is the quote-unquote God object. And that's where you have this very large class in object-oriented programming that is responsible for too many things. So it's an obvious violation of single responsibility principle. So under the context of MVC, this God object could touch the model, so it could be touching the database in certain layers. It could be touching the view, so it could be messing around with a template, and it could also be making these transactions with the controller. So it's has its hands in different buckets, and it's not responsible for just one thing. I deal with that on a daily basis. Sometimes it's code that I wrote, sometimes it's code that other people wrote. And one of the challenges there of dealing with a God object is that because it touches so many different things, it has all these coupled dependencies. So if something breaks in one location, it'll break everywhere. So when we refactor these God objects, what we try to do is to really adhere to single responsibility principle. So if it's a class that should only exist on the model layer or only be responsible for business logic, we try to abstract away all the other responsibilities to other objects. I think Sandy Metz, she made a very excellent example or kind of analogy where she recommended that your classes, you want them to be these tiny isolated islands with small bridges or limited number of bridges connecting them, so that you have one or two classes that do one or two things very, very well, and they have very super simple APIs, and they talk to other classes through their simple APIs as well. And at the end, once you refactor God objects into good object-oriented design, you have a very clean, stable API that anyone can really jump onto. And it's clean, you know where everything is, it's very simple. You know that this class only does 2 or 3 things, and you're good to go.
Nice. Do you feel that using separation of concerns or using design patterns in MVC has changed how you work collaboratively in a team at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have single responsibility principle and separation of concerns, and one of your coworkers writes a class that take for example is responsible for some type of presentation logic. So maybe it's like a component, like a banner or something on the front end. You can reuse that anywhere else because you know that it's well tested and it only does that one thing and one thing very well.
Great. Thank you for coming to speak with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.